Welcome to another video from ExplainingComputers.com. This time we're going to look at alternatives to a Raspberry Pi 4. Specifically, I'm going to present you with a range of ARM SBCs from 5 different manufacturers that I've reviewed on this channel in the past couple of years and which remain on sale for no more than $100 and ideally significantly less. When I first reviewed these boards we're going to look at, some had relatively weak software support. So this video provides an opportunity to see where things may have improved. Right, I thought we'd start with the Banana Pi M5, which I first looked at in April 2021. This is one of several Banana SBCs I've reviewed on the channel over the past 9 years, and the Banana Pi M6 has now been announced. However, the M6 doesn't seem to be available yet, and indeed it's not listed here on the Banana Pi AliExpress store, which is still headlined by the M5. And indeed, if we click on the M5, we see it's currently selling here for $67.51, and it's also available on Odroid for $91.95. So, what do we get? Well, under the heatsink which I've added to this board, we have an Amlogic S905X3 system on a chip, which has 4 2GHz A55 cores, along with an ARM Mali G31 GPU. And we also have 4GB of RAM on this board. We have 16GB of onboard flash storage, which is rather nice. We have 4 USB 3 ports, we have gigabit Ethernet, we have 4K HDMI output, but we don't have on this board Wi-Fi or Bluetooth, and we also don't have camera or LCD connectors. Turning to software, since I first looked at the board, updated images have been released here on the Banana Pi M5 wiki, and these include Android as well as Raspbian, and yes I did say Raspbian, and Ubuntu and Debian. Back in April 2021, I found that the Android image was stylish and stable, but very much provided for development purposes. And so this time I've decided to go straight to Linux. And here we are running Ubuntu with a Mate desktop, and whilst the latest September 2022 image from Banana Pi is for Ubuntu 20.04, having installed it, I was prompted to upgrade to Ubuntu 22.04, which to my amazement worked absolutely fine, and that's what we're running here. If we just bring up the system monitor and go across to a system, you can see, yes, we're running Ubuntu Jammy Jellyfish, and as we just saw, the resources are happily wandering along, not a lot of activity at the moment. And this is very stable and very, very responsive, incredibly responsive for a Linux distro on an ARM board, let alone one at this price point. We can bring up software nice and quickly. Let's just launch GIMP there. Always good to see the mushrooms coming up. And that was fast, wasn't it? We are running off eMMC flash storage, but even so, that was impressive. And impressive is the adjective I would use to describe this system. It really is a very nice desktop distro running on an ARM SBC. But we'll come out of that because we always have to. We can't stay there forever, because I'm sure some of you want to know about browser performance. I've had a bit of messing around to get the browser working after the upgrade, but it's working fine now. Here we are on Explaining Computers, and I'm sure you want to see YouTube playback, so I'll just set up my usual test. And here we are, and I'm sure you can see there are quite a lot of drop frames top left, but it's mainly when things settle. By the time things have settled down, as they seem to have done now, we've got very few drop frames. YouTube playback performance here is very good. I am very impressed. It seems the software has improved quite a bit on the Banana Pi M5. It is certainly a very good Raspberry Pi 4 alternative. Now, let's turn to the VIM1s, which I first looked at in October 2022. Here the board is fitted in one of the excellent Khadas cases. These come in lots of different colours, as you can see, and you always get a great feel of quality with Khadas hardware. So let's take off the top. Here we go, and we can now see the board, which is currently selling on the Khadas website for $64.90 and the same price on Amazon.com. In terms of specification, we have an Amlogic S905Y4 system on a chip with 4 2GHz A35 cores and an ARM Mali G31 MP2 GPU. This is coupled with 2GB of RAM, 16GB of onboard eMMC flash storage, and onboard Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. However, other connectivity is a little limited. Around the back here we do have an Ethernet port, but it's only 100 megabits rather than 1 gigabit, and we do have 2 Type A USB ports, but they're only USB 2, there's no USB 3 on this board. Since I first tested the VIM1s, new Android and Ubuntu 22.04 images have been released and can be installed using the onboard Infinity WoW firmware. Previously, whilst Android performance was excellent, YouTube was not in the Play Store and had to be installed by other means. But this has now been corrected, and 1080p YouTube playback in Android on the VIM1s is perfect, with the previous issue of a top bar remaining in full screen mode having been fixed. So there is no doubt that the VIM1s is an excellent Raspberry Pi 4 alternative if you want to run Android. Meanwhile, in the latest edition of Ubuntu for the board, performance is solid and stable, although it's also a bit sluggish, which is perhaps not surprising given that we're running this heaviness of distro on a 2GB board. And as last time, I also had to install my own browser. There was no browser pre-installed here. I have installed Chromium. Let's just run it up. It'll come up in a second. Come on, Chromium, you can do it. Run up here on the VIM1s. There it is. And I've set it, as you can see, to show us the status of graphical acceleration. And we don't have hardware acceleration here. Probably not a surprise given that there was no browser pre-installed in this operating system. But we will just do a YouTube test because I'm sure you want to see it. And here we are. And we do have some drop frames, but they're not too many, only 3 so far. Oh, now 73 now. And like with some of the other boards, once things settle, it's not too bad. This is pretty usable YouTube playback, but there are a number of drop frames there. It's nowhere near as good as we just saw on the VIM1s running Android, where I'm sure we had hardware acceleration. Now, let's take a look at the Odroid C4. This is one of several potential Raspberry Pi 4 alternatives from hard kernel, with the others including the M1 and the N2+. However, the C4 is a recent board closest to the Raspberry Pi 4 price point, currently selling for $62.95 on Ameridroid and £77.53 including taxes on Odroid Co. UK. For this, we get an Amlogic S905X3 with 4 2GHz A55 cores, as well as an ARM Mali G31 MP2 GPU. And there's also 4GB of RAM on this board. We have 4 USB 3 ports, gigabit Ethernet, we have full-size 4K HDMI, and we have a barrel jack for power, with a 12V 2A adapter being recommended. However, sadly, we don't have any onboard Wi-Fi on the C4, we don't have LCD or camera connectors, and we don't even have a 3.5mm audio jack. This is a bit like an SBC made by Apple. But underneath, we do find a socket for an eMMC flash module. Now, when I first reviewed the C4 in May 2020, I tested several different operating systems and had to do quite a bit of messing around. Since that time, hardkernel have continued to release new images, with the most recent being a July 2022 version of Ubuntu Mate. So let's boot it up, and here we are. We can see the jammy jellyfish on the desktop of the Odroid C4, and by another route, we've ended up running the same version of Ubuntu with the same desktop as we did on the Banana Pi M5. And the Banana Pi M5 has exactly the same system on the chip as the Odroid C4, and it's therefore not a surprise that they both got good performance in this distro. It wasn't inevitable, but it is the case. We go down to System Tools and we bring up the System Monitor. we can see again, there we are running Ubuntu 2204 Jammy Jellyfish here on the Odroid, and things are pootling along quite nicely. Not a lot of requirement being made on the system right now, but things are running okay. Let's run up a browser. This is a very stable operating system. I've been playing with this. It works very well. I'll be very happy to do lots of work on this system. We've gone to Explaining Computers. We can check out SBCs. Many of the SBCs in this video, in fact all the SBCs in this video are on this list somewhere. There's so many SBCs on this page. Anyway, I'm sure you want to see the YouTube playback test. We don't have here GPU accelerated media playback, but we will do the test as we do with all the boards here because it's an important test to run on any desktop operating system these days. And whilst we do have drop frames, once things have settled, playback isn't too bad. It's perfectly usable. The frames are still being dropped as we can see top left, but this is watchable. It's not ideal, but it's certainly watchable. I'm impressed with Ubuntu Mate running here on the Odroid C4, and if you want to see it running some other operating systems, including Android and Corelec, just look across to my previous video. Right, I thought we'd now take a look at the Rock 3A, which I first reviewed in December 2021. And I'm very keen to return to this board, partly because it's a great piece of hardware, and partly because, like all Rock SBCs, the 3A is designed by Radsa, but it's now exclusively manufactured by OKdo. And OKdo is part of the RS group, and for 10 years it manufactured Raspberry Pis. Indeed, if we look, for example, at this Raspberry Pi 4 box, we can see an OKdo logo. But in July 2022, OKdo ceased to be a licensed Raspberry Pi manufacturer and is now heavily promoting its Rock SBC range. Indeed, online we can now visit the OKdo software and downloads hub, as well as the Rock SBC shop. And this lists many Rock boards, including the Rock 5B, which I looked at in October 2022, but which I've excluded from this review as it costs at least $129. Returning to the Rock 3A, this is based on an RK3568 system on a chip with 4 2GHz A55 cores and an ARM Mali G52 GPU. The board comes with 2, 4 or 8GB of RAM, with prices ranging from about $45 to $85. We also have 2 USB 3 and 2 USB 2 ports. We've got a full-size 4K HDMI connector. We've got a camera and LCD connectors, but we don't have on this board onboard Wi-Fi. However, we do have this E-keyed M.2 slot, and this can take a wireless module, something like this, and these start from about $7.50. Also, underneath the board, we've got an eMMC module socket, currently occupied with an eMMC module, and we've also got this M.2 slot. This can take an NVMe SSD, although it does point out this way, so it really needs to be used with an extender board. When I first reviewed the Rock 3A, there were some issues connecting to Wi-Fi in Debian, and I also couldn't access an NVMe SSD in Debian, although it worked fine in Ubuntu Server. But since then, new Debian and Android images have been released, so if we boot up with an NVMe SSD attached, here in Debian, I'm now pleased to report we can access an NVMe SSD. And if I bring up a terminal, we can also test its speed, like this. Very exciting. What are we going to get? I know, you don't. Let's have a look, and there we are, 960 megabytes a second. That's a good speed for an NVMe SSD on an ARM SBC, particularly one at this price point. This said, there are still a few software issues in this distro. For a start, if I click on web browser there, we get that error. That's probably just a link, but it's not good in an official distro. And also if I try to launch, for example, the Chromium browser, it also doesn't work. Nothing will happen. We just sit here until the end of time, so we won't use the Chromium browser. We will actually use the other browser here, which is Firefox ESR. There we are, that will come up. And we'll use this to do a YouTube test. I'll warn you in advance, it won't be fantastic, but we'll do the test. a great deal of messing around here to get this to play at all. As you can see, it's not really playing at the moment. Oh, it's finally playing. This is not good YouTube playback. Lots and lots of drop frames, even when we let this settle. I suppose it isn't that bad now, it's settled a bit, but this is not the board on which you want to watch a streaming media playback in a browser. So let's now take a look at Android, and here we are. And this does seem to be a bit of a work in progress. We do have the Play Store, but when I pull it up like that, as you can see, we get this message, which isn't terribly helpful. There is quite a lot of software pre-installed, which does include, for example, YouTube, which is good to see. Let's go to a YouTube clip, my standard YouTube test clip. We get our message again. And if we play this, playback is okay. It doesn't seem to be dropping frames. I can't find a way to bring up Stats for Nerds here. The controls are not what I'm expecting to find in Android, and clearly we're not here in high res. And we keep getting this message anyway, which would make playback hardly ideal. So there we are. As you can probably tell, I am disappointed. I expected by now the Rock 3A, particularly with OKDo's backing, to be a fantastic Raspberry Pi alternative. And yet, sadly, it is still a fantastic piece of hardware which is let down by weak software support. Right, our last board is this, the Orange Pi 5, which I first reviewed back in January. This is one of several Orange Pis that can serve as a Raspberry Pi 4 alternative, with others including the LTS versions of the Orange Pi 3 and Orange Pi 4. However, the Orange Pi 5 is the most powerful, with this 4GB model currently selling for $75 on AliExpress. So it fits within our criteria, although Orange Pi prices do seem to change a great deal. The Orange Pi 5 is based on this octa-core RK3588S, which has got 4 2.4 GHz A76 cores and 4 1.8 GHz A55 cores, as well as an ARM Mali G610 MC4 GPU. In addition, on this board we've got 4GB of RAM, we've got an 8K full-size HDMI connector, and next to it a USB-C port with DisplayPort 1.4 output. On the board we also have 2 LCD connectors, 3 CSI camera connectors, and underneath we've got an M.2 slot. This is M-keyed for an NVMe SSD, although it's designed for a 2242 form factor card. And the PCIe 2.0 interface on this board constrains the speed to under 400 megabytes a second. It should also be noted we don't have onboard Wi-Fi on this board, and the GPIO connector here is 26 pin rather than 40. As we saw back in January, the official Ubuntu and Debian images for the Orange Pi 5 are very responsive, with the board significantly outperforming a Raspberry Pi 4 in a Kdenlive rendering test. Here in Ubuntu, if we run up a browser, there we are down there, it'll run up Google Chrome. When it comes up, you will see in a second, there we are. We do not have GPU accelerated video playback, but regardless, if we set up my standard YouTube test, we find that we get good video playback because we've got a lot of CPU power available to throw at rendering the video, and so the actual playback is very good. When it settles, there are no drop frames at all. And before somebody types it in the comments, I am aware there is GPU hardware acceleration available in other distros, such as Reborn OS. And I'm not going to try that here, as it's going to be the subject of another video. In December 2022, I interviewed Eben Upton about Raspberry Pi availability. And from what he told us, we know that things aren't going to get back to normal until the second half of 2023. And in that context, I hope you found this video to be useful. If you'd like me to make a follow-up video on alternatives to a Raspberry Pi Zero, do let me know down in the comments section. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. And I hope to talk to you again very soon.